Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Narcissism Nation, Precision Cycle TV. This is Elevate.epo. I'm Enrique. Let's open it up. Today, I want to talk about some of the recent news that came out of Washington, D.C. Of course, Pam Bondi came out on Monday and said that there is nothing to the Jeffrey Epstein files. They have decided to close the case and not reveal any of the names in those black books that were being referenced extensively throughout MAGA and the rest of the political discourse to potentially rile up the base, get more votes, get more interests, whatever it was, and to essentially throw red meat out there for the constituency. That story has essentially just gone away, and the Trump administration has said there's nothing to see here. We're washing our hands of the situation and we're moving on. Yesterday, we see Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, President Trump receiving him, whether serious or not, being presented with a legitimate claim for a Nobel Peace Prize, and that's something else that's fairly laughable, fairly comical as well. But it's illustrative of a bigger issue here. When we put together the evidence and the timelines, something doesn't necessarily add up. It's very convenient that all of this went away after the Trump administration placated Bibi Netanyahu and the IDF by striking Iran, and then having this entire conversation about Nobel Peace Prizes. And regardless of what we may think of the man or the movement or anything, the reality is that this looks a lot like just more gaslighting, normalization of bad behavior, and the typical operating procedure of Narcissism Nation, this country that we live in, which consistently has lied to us and used us as foils, as suckers, as marks, some more than others, in order to gain political advantage and numbers and power. Today, I hope to break down the timeline a bit of the Jeffrey Epstein files, how they contextualize within the American experience in politics. And I don't want to present this as a partisan issue because there's people on both sides. Billionaires don't necessarily classify as Democrats or Republican. They just classify with and identify with who can give them the most money and protect their tax shelters. So I don't want to say that this is coming from a Democrat. This isn't necessarily coming from a Republican. This is an independent stance here to really look at the timeline events and bring that back to this Narcissism Nation that we live in, and the ways in which the common American has to navigate the world, being gaslit, lied to, being used oftentimes and manipulated as leverage for a greater gain of billionaires. As we continue to look at this case, we don't want to forget the fact that the people who suffered here the most are the unnamed that will probably never get justice, certainly not within the next 3 years while this administration is in Washington. We continue to push forward and speak on this, not necessarily to shame people who did this, although those who did participate and were the perpetrators deserve to be shamed. This is more to make sure that we're making every effort to respect the victims, bring their voices forward, and not forget the human beings attached to the dirty, often cruel and downright disgusting behavior of some of these billionaires we seem to idolize. Donald Trump is not someone you should look up to. Neither is Bill Clinton. Neither is Barack Obama. Neither are some of the other people, left and right, in our government, because they have shown, and the only thing that you can deduce by looking at all the evidence is that these people are some of the most corrupt and disgusting human beings on the face of the earth. We're here at Precision Cycle, Elevate.epo, to illustrate the toxic environment that we do live in and operate in. Because once we understand what is happening, that is the key to true liberation. So with that, let's jump right into some of the key findings here of this Jeffrey Epstein situation. We're not going to draw conclusions based in politics. Okay, we're not going to go down conspiratorial routes. We want to make sure we're not adhering to the worst practices of people in the media. There's a reason why X and Twitter has become the hellscape that it's become. It's essentially a place where conspiracy theorists, anti-Semites, racists and misogynists have migrated to spew as much hate as they can. We're going to steer clear of any of that. What I'm hoping to do is to paint a picture of what is actually happening from a rational truth perspective. Everything I'll be reading today is from reporting that comes straight from the Department of Justice, from congressional hearings, from independent journalism that doesn't have any skin in the game other than wanting to illustrate some of the worst corporate, bureaucratic, billionaire actors that exist here in the United States and the world. Hopefully through that, we'll see how we are being gaslit in real time so we can expect more from our leaders and really get to some type of justice for those that had to suffer and endure a lot of these worst practices and just horrific conditions and experiences. So thank you very much for joining me today. Hopefully we can have a lively discussion and we can move through some of this evidence and really get to the bottom of what exactly is happening here. So we want to just make it plain and clear that Jeffrey Epstein was operating in plain sight. He wasn't a mystery person and wasn't operating on the fringes because in reality, he didn't have to. Just like Trump wasn't an outsider, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't an outsider to the predator class. From all the evidence that's been presented, somebody that was early on here grooming young women in America, a major source and player within that elite predator class. The early 2000s in the United States, if you haven't been paying attention or weren't alive back then or weren't engaged in politics, taught the elites that they could pretty much get away with anything. We see that sort of steroids now, but in the early 2000s, we saw how the Bush administration had essentially trafficked a lot of this behavior and really pushed towards billionaires being made into these rock stars they are today. Trump had The Apprentice and he was being idolized by people on NBC. The same people that brought Survivor were now giving him a platform to illustrate a lot of his worst practices and to put his entire dysfunction on display for people to consume. People ate that up because in that time we were under this trance that everyone wanted to be a billionaire and wanted to act like one of these guys who seemed to have it all. But in reality, we're just playing a part and living credit by credit. Ultimately, we're seeing the ends of that as we're seeing how truly awful some of these people were, right? But the media framed Epstein in the 2000s as a mystery rather than a ritual abuse profiteer, right? They created the sense that Jeffrey Epstein was somebody who should be revered and well respected simply because he could bring in billions of dollars. At that time, there was a very good chance that he was playing both sides and was, at the time of his death, still was a Mossad agent, an IDF Mossad agent that was here that playing both sides and really getting his tentacles within the higher levels of the American government. Again, we're not here to say it's Trump exclusively. Bill Clinton's name came up in the book. All kinds of other people's names came up in the book. And I'm just as disgusted to learn that the president I voted for twice while in college is someone that would participate potentially, allegedly, in those types of activities. And it gives me no joy to say that. But the reality, if we're being completely objective, Bill Clinton has as much blood on his hands as Donald Trump. Having said that, though, Bill Clinton isn't in power, and we're probably never going to have another Clinton in power. So it's really irrelevant to talk about him anymore. And we shouldn't get lost in that both sides of Bill Clinton did it, because the reality is the president in the moment is Donald Trump. So we're going to keep this to Donald Trump because he is the most relevant person involved in all this at the moment. With that, let's walk through the timeline. This comes straight from Department of Justice reporting. This comes straight from Congress, the investigation that they went into and delivered. These are some of the key moments of the timeline, and I'll walk you through some of the timelines here. Beginning in the 1990s, Bill Clinton, Epstein, and Trump were social peers. That is a fact. Atlantic City, Mar-a-Lago, Victoria's Secret parties. That's well documented. That's on record. This video that both men have openly talked about in their books about how the 1990s were spent frequenting each other's establishments and core value propositions. Okay. 1992, Trump hosts the calendar girl parties at Mar-a-Lago. Epstein is often present in these parties. This is fact that no one is refuting and nobody has refuted up until now. Jump to 2002, right? Trump praises Epstein in the New York magazines. He calls him, quote, a terrific guy. He likes beautiful women, many of them on the younger side. That's a direct quote. This can be looked up by anybody trying to do independent research. That was 2002. Jump to 2005 through 2008. That's when the first investigation in Florida was launched. Epstein's sweetheart deal, sealed by Alex Acosta, was in the news, talked about a lot, but ultimately nothing ever came of it. Again, we're talking about people very close in Florida real estate, which includes people like Trump at Mar-a-Lago and people who are now Florida officials and have been political officials for a long time. Come to 2008, Epstein pleads guilty on solicitation of a minor, but he only serves 13 months, mostly on work release. This again was something that was reported, but it was not necessarily elevated or really pushed throughout the narrative, because at that time Epstein was a public figure, but not necessarily to the extent that we see his reach now. That is a fact on file, and that is part of the timeline that cannot be refuted. We get to 2008 through 2016, and those 8 years, Epstein continues to fly high, literally between Manhattan, Palm Beach, and his island. The connections deepen. Wexner, Bill Gates, Leon Black, government figures, all these people start popping up on the radar. And some of these names start to become trickled out into the media, but we don't necessarily have any real concrete proof. So we're not going to make accusations about people frequenting islands and engaging in activities they know they shouldn't engage in. But that's when the black book and the flight logs get released. They leak and name Trump's Clinton's Prince Andrew and others specifically. Here we see some of the ripple effects of some of this information that's coming out, right? These are major names, major players. And again, the PR machines now start to kick in. This is right around the time when Hillary Clinton starts to launch her presidential campaign in 2016. So there's a lot of hyper focus on the Clintons, while Trump certainly not out of the limelight and had stepped in the mud himself oftentimes with his own actions. He got a pass because he had not had the gravitas of the Clintons and was not universally hated by a lot of people who were still upset about Benghazi. That black book gets leaked. Now we have these names floating around in the atmosphere. In 2015, Virginia Giuffre filed, hope I'm saying that right, files lawsuits against Ghislaine Maxwell, claiming that Epstein forced her into sex with powerful men. This is in 2015. You can look up those cases. Up until 10 years ago, we were still seeing evidence of wrongdoing here, and Jeffrey Epstein now becomes a bigger player politically. But what we see from this is that no federal reinvestigation was launched into Epstein, despite the mounting public evidence. They essentially swept it under the rug, let Trump become the president, let all that go down, and collectively we got lost in all the other things during that time, to the point where it hit the back burner and wasn't really that big of an issue. 2017 rolls around, right? This is when the narcissist revealed that the mirror 2017 key moments. Epstein tells Michael Wolff he has Trump's, quote, closet friend, says Trump slept with Melania on the Lolita Express, right? 2018, Trump attempts to block Fire and Fury, the book that Michael Wolff wrote, Fear and Exposure, which is a very good book, and you should probably read it if you haven't had a chance to. 2019 in July, Epstein is arrested by the Southern District of New York under pressure from Miami Herald reporting. 2019 of August, Epstein mysteriously, quote, dies by suicide while he's in custody. And quite suspiciously, the video cameras happened to fail on his unit on that particular day. The guards just mysteriously vanished and weren't around. The autopsy was disputed, but there was never any clarity. And to this day, we still see the memes, right? Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. There was a reason why someone wanted to cover that up, to the extent where William Barr, the Attorney General at the time, called it the perfect storm of screw-ups. And so MAGA then moves to distance Trump from Epstein. He says that Trump banned him from Mar-a-Lago. But we all know that's false, because there's evidence that suggests up until the moments where Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, he was still quite frequently a guest and someone that enjoyed the grounds at Mar-a-Lago. But we see how the presidency here begins to panic. when a lot of this information comes out, and then Epstein mysteriously passes. So then we get to 2020 through 2025, where we're at now, right? This wasn't just a cover-up, it was a recalibration of what the public would accept. Here are some of the key moments. In 2020, Maxwell's arrested, right? She's sentenced in 2022, but there's still no client list produced. 2023 through 2024, Trump reemerges. He demands the Epstein files to expose the elites. 2025, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, releases phase 1 of the Epstein files, mostly redacted leaks through the Public Office of Public Affairs. And this was the red meat that she was offering up to the MAGA base. As a thank you for voting for us, we might give you what you want. But as we come to find out, this wasn't necessarily the case. This is where we get to today, the DOJ and the FBI memo. What does it say? It confirms that there's 300 gigabytes of material that exists. That's quite a lot to fill a hard drive. Most of that confirms that there's 1,000 plus victims. And we're not going to get into what's actually in there, but we can all agree that is inappropriate. And 300 gigabytes of video, that's a lot of video. Over 1,000 victims, that's a lot of victims. And this confirms that there's no list, right? No further charges would be pending. That's the final draft from the DOJ and the FBI. So Pam Bondi's office and Kash Patel at the FBI, they've gone together. They've realized that there is all this material. There are all these victims, and it just happened to just be one man and he's dead, and one person who's in jail right now, and that's about it. But if there's over 1,000 victims, then that's pretty far-fetched to think that it was only one person doing that, especially if they're admitting that it was a trafficking ring. You don't necessarily just traffic people for your own enjoyment. But the reality is that if there's over 1,000 plus victims and over 300 gigabytes of material, there's probably other people involved. Michael Wolff then releases the tapes of Epstein describing Trump's depravity. Mainstream media buries it as unverifiable. A person who wrote a very clean book, who put all this out there, was then told he was flat out lying and wasn't able to verify any of it. So it gets buried in the news cycle. What was all this really about? This wasn't justice, it was leverage. And undoubtedly, we're all the marks. You, me, all the MAGA, anybody who continues to consume this. Epstein as an asset, he's not just a predator. He's possible Israeli intel. That's something that has been widely reported on. He has intel connections, blackmail, and structure. There's a reason why Donald Trump struck Iranian targets when Bibi Netanyahu told him to. Netanyahu obviously has some kind of advantage over Trump. And Trump is willing to trade on the fact that Netanyahu has this advantage, that he's willing to betray his own base, right? But this is indicative of a bigger cultural collapse. This is narcissism replaced truth. This is where we're at in society today, where if you open up a DSM from 1987, it will completely not resemble anything that we call mental health today, because we've normalized so much of this sick and twisted stuff. We actually don't know where boundaries end and where actual real healing and agency begins, right? So the only interpretation that you can make is that Epstein was a mirror, Trump was the mask, and the public, they are ultimately the product here. So when we look at it from that perspective, the timeline that we just laid out, it's the cover-up industrial complex. Epstein was a human currency exchange in all of this. He was somebody who was being leveraged by possibly Israel, possibly the United States, to entrap a lot of people here in the United States, to get them to do things that they wouldn't necessarily do for their base, but really do in the name of advancing potentially the Israeli cause. Epstein's power wasn't just about money. It was about compromising these people and putting them in positions where they had to then do things for people or have incriminating evidence put against them. If you remember the early 2000s, you remember David Vitter. He was a senator from Louisiana. He was somebody who had been a staunch anti-LGBTQ and abortion and all those types of really conservative positions. He ultimately was run out of the Senate because they had pictures of him dressing like a baby while engaged in fornication with prostitutes. There's the story of Jeff Gannon, who was a male prostitute who in the 2000s, there was evidence that between 2003 and 2005, he was giving credentials to the White House and was there servicing some of the highest members of the Bush administration. That is all fact. That is stuff that exists in real time. There were people reporting Sam Cedar, for instance, somebody reporting on that. Nobody seemed to ever put two and two together. That big reason why this was happening was because our officials were being leveraged at the time by an entity that was potentially getting them to do things that was anti-American, anti the interests of American, and pro the interests of other countries. And we saw how the legal industry here functioned as a laundering mechanism for this bad behavior. It gave them the cover to be able to go out there and continue to do a lot of these bad acts and entrap a lot of these people and get them to participate more and more in some of the worst depraved activities human beings can engage in. The victims here were also incidental. They didn't care. The network was the goal, right? The network of people who were abusing and trafficking, that was more important than actually seeking justice for the victims. And that's the sad part in all this, is that we forget a human factor and we're just chasing down political narratives rather than trying to get to the bottom of why rich men were allowed to abuse their power under the color of authority and victimize people who didn't have much power in this world. Epstein's death was too convenient to just be coincidence. Trump and Bill Barr orchestrated a deflection in real time. That was not justice. That's a rich, powerful attorney getting their rich, powerful client off the hook. And the Trump denials that were being placed out there was typical narcissistic Trump. They were all preemptive gaslighting and projective identification. He was essentially telling on himself the entire time because he knows he's guilty. And that's what narcissists do. They tell on themselves when they project all of this out into the world. And that was because MAGA's cult-like dynamics blinded it to the truth that they were supporting a man who is possibly a pedophile. That is not something controversial. They recognize that they are supporting a person who has flown to an island to engage with minors. That is on record. They lie to themselves and lie to the American people and try to think that they are somehow more patriotic. They're out here supporting child rape. This is who they are. And this is the way that we should actually be treating them in real time. As people who are not patriots, they are not concerned about anything other than having their side win and having their racism, misogyny, and all the other bad elements of their personality mirrored to them by a man who is obviously a deranged criminal. This was the psychological collapse of the American masculine. The thought that they could go out there and talk tough and be these, quote, alpha type people while supporting someone who is literally a child rape. If that's masculinity and that's how you want to define it in 2025 in America, you can keep that version of masculinity. That's fornicate minors. First and foremost, those alpha out there, they're not necessarily anything other than caricatures of the weakest versions of humanity that you can imagine. They may have the muscles and the guns and the training, but when it comes to their actual emotional intelligence and development, cognitive development, they're some of the weakest children you will ever find. And the files then tell us that when Pam Bondi stands up there, hands out binders to influencers that's literally with nothing in it, that's pure theater. That's someone putting on a show to placate the base, throwing out the red meat to make sure that the base is still with them. ABC and the DOJ confirmed no list, no charges, no justice. That's really what we're getting at the end of the day with the Pam Bondi speech, with what's happening now at the FBI. Kash Patel used credibility shield in all this and limited the hangout. Kash Patel essentially used the credibility shield to limit the outcomes here and to not necessarily deliver on the truth. MAGA influencers were used to sell their silence in real time. Go on Twitter right now, you're going to see half of the MAGA base is still with this very sick individual. Half of them have seen what it is and are now very actively asking the administration to resign or do something they promised because they are not happy. The American people in general shouldn't be happy because that is the worst parts of the deep state. That is the worst part of the entrenched malfeasance and derangement of politics in Washington, D.C. It's just more of the swamp presenting itself in real time to people who don't know what politics are and don't even know what ethics are and don't even know what actual Christianity is in many ways. They just go around projecting this stuff and mask the fact that they're just as deranged and depraved as the people who have perpetrated some of these crimes. And so that ultimately leaves us to the American public being ritualistically humiliated, again, used as foils, used as suckers to sell this thing that has gotten a president in power who probably shouldn't be there, but is hiding in the highest level at the land so that he doesn't have to face justice for all the other crimes that he has committed. Let's not forget the fact that Donald Trump is already a criminal in U.S. court. That's irrefutable as well. We may sit here and talk about how this may be the Justice Department exercising its power negatively, regardless of the fact that jury of his peers found that he was guilty in a Southern District of New York courtroom just last year. And yet he is the president of the United States, and that says a lot about the people who have voting powers in this country. So what's the real story? What we're left with is to see that Jeffrey Epstein is a blackmail broker. He was somebody that was used as an in-between to get one person to get another person to do what they wanted them to do. Look at Iran and what had just happened recently. There is conclusion in your proof. Trump was leveraged by foreign actors using Epstein as pressure. The narrative collapse is the point. Confusion protects power. When we have all this division, people fighting back and forth online, really losing track of who has the football, more time goes by. They get to do a lot more of the things they want to do, which is stealing money. That's what the Trump administration is really focused on. Stealing money, protecting itself, leveraging as much as they can from this opportunity so that they can rip off the American public and put it in their own pockets. MAGA was never a movement. MAGA is a grooming operation. That's really the only conclusion you can make here, because the reality is that they were suckers and they were just as complicit and victims as those poor women that were victimized by Epstein on that island. So Jeffrey Epstein was an institutional asset protected by the systems of power, not an isolated predator. The public was lied to repeatedly. And both political parties are to blame here. The elites, the network of elites, federal agencies are complicit in burying the truth. How do we arrive here? Let's walk this through step by step. Epstein had deep ties to powerful individuals, including Donald Trump, and those ties were real and not speculative. He called Trump his closest friend on tape. That is evidence. Trump appeared in flight logs, was quoted praising Epstein, and was present at numerous events. Epstein detailed Trump's predatory behavior and manipulation of women with chilling clarity. Okay, those are three things that we know for sure. Once you take those 3 points, what's your conclusion? Trump wasn't a fringe acquaintance. He was embedded in Epstein's world. He was embedded in Epstein's social circle and sexual network for years. That's the only real rational conclusion you can make. Despite overwhelming evidence, the system chose not to prosecute anyone beyond Epstein and Maxwell. Just smells and screams cover up. We had the one perpetrator can mysteriously, conveniently die and they can end with him. And that's really the American way in many ways. But the FBI recovered over 300 gigabytes of sex child abuse material, including thousands of photos and videos that confirmed over 1,000 victims, but declared no client list, no blackmail scheme, no further charges. So the Department of Justice and the FBI review, the only conclusion you can get from that is that it's implausible, if not impossible, that a trafficking operation of this scale, run by billionaires, politicians, and royalty, didn't involve other perpetrators. The DOJ chose containment over accountability, and that should be a glaring red flag for any American, that DOJ is willing to cover up crimes for political purposes. That is a hallmark of corrupt third world nation countries that don't respect the law, and that is what's happening today in the White House at the moment. Pam Bondi and the DOJ officials staged a public transparency campaign that was hollow and misleading. That's the only conclusion you can take when you look at the February 2025 event. Bondi claimed to release the first phase of the files for transparency. Yet she was later informed of thousands of undisclosed pages and had to task the FBI director with investigating his own agency for withholding them. She handed out symbolic Epstein binders to influencers, many of which contained nothing new in them. There was nothing to be gained from them. It was just the same tired, recycled PR narrative that was ultimately delivered just the other day. So the only rational conclusion you can make from that is the public release was a PR stunt, not the truth dump. It was meant to be. And really, its sole purpose was to distract and not disclose any real new information and begin the mechanism to sweep this under the rug. The FBI and the DOJ explicitly discouraged further public inquiry from framing skepticism as harmful to victims, right? Their memo stated that releasing more records and discussing, quote, conspiracy theories would damage victim recovery and national interest. That is a complete and utter lie, because from day one, no one has given anything of any type of interest in caring about what victims felt, and they still don't, right? They are double speaking, using lawyer talk to really just say more nonsense and gaslight victims by telling them, we don't want to hurt you more, so we're not going to tell people who hurt you. That is classic narcissism. This is baked into the cake of America. This is standard operating procedure. And to use the victims as a shield as to why you can't go further into this, that is complete and utter nonsense and the height of cowardice. This rhetorical move, it just to shut down public accountability in the name of, quote, protecting the very people the system already failed. That only conclusion can tell you is that institutions weaponize empathy to silence the inquiry. This is textbook narcissistic abuse logic. And it's disgusting, and it's something that's happening in real time, and it's something that as Americans we should really fight back against, because this is what they're telling you. Again, go back to Paulo Freire, the language of the oppressor. They're essentially oppressing you right now. We can't tell you the truth because the truth would hurt the victims. That's complete and utter nonsense. If you're trafficking that line, you're just as complicit. The American public across party lines, this isn't a red thing, this isn't a blue thing, Democrats, Republicans, across party lines have been systematically gaslit, okay? MAGA voters were promised a list. They got redacted PDFs. Liberals were told Epstein was a fluke of wealth and patriarchy, not the product of the state. The media focus on Maxwell trial never demanded names. They just wanted their pound of flesh, but they never wanted to go deeper than that. The only rational conclusion you can make from that is the people who believed in justice on either side of the aisle here, they were fed symbolic victories while the real network was preserved and protected and allowed to operate and continues to operate potentially under the cover of authority. So again, the final nonpartisan takeaways here. This isn't about a left or a right issue. It's about top to bottom systems of abuse. It's about corporate legal intelligence and media that protects Epstein and abusers like them until he was no longer useful, until he had served his purpose, and now they were able to get rid of him. Anyone still defending anyone named on those logs, tapes, or files is either delusional or protecting power. They should look into the mechanism underlying that, because I'm sure there are some daddy issues there as well. The undeniable truth is this is the only conclusion we can make. At Precision Cycle, at Narcissism Nation, we are hoping then to put forward, how does this play into the psychology of just wellness? We cannot get well as human beings if we cannot even mirror that from our leaders, if we cannot mirror that from the structures that we put our faith in. If we are supposed to go out there and get our needs met from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of them being safety, and we look to our leaders and they're the ones engaging in some of this, which is not unlike some of the things a lot of victims have had to navigate and process and deal with and heal from, then how are we supposed to be serious about mental health if we're not holding these people accountable? And at Precision Cycle, we hope to be able to draw that out and to illustrate bad actors in any environment, whether it's corporate, financial, relational, political. Put that out there and it's illustrate that these people are gaslighting you and being manipulative, much like the narcissist in your life. This is what it looks like. Object relations theory tells us that everything is relational, and when the government continues to gaslight you with narcissism, there's no real reason why you should keep thinking to yourself why your mate, your partner does the same things to you. It should be automatic now, because the reality is the reason they do that is because they look up at the top And it's normal up there, so why won't it be normal down here? The reality is we cannot get to true healing until we understand exactly what they're saying to us and how to fight back. That's what Precision Cycle does. That's what Elevate.epo's mission is. If you're tired of just sitting there and being gaslit, DM me. Send me an email, Enrique@elevateepo.com. Precision Cycle TV on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. DM me and we'll start to show you how you are being gaslit in real time and what you can do to fight back and how you can start building your own boundaries so these things are not continually disturbing your peace. Thank you very much for joining me today. We'll be back on Friday. It's been great to talk to you about this topic, and hopefully we can find ways as Americans on both sides of the aisle to heal from this by holding those that need to be held accountable, bringing them to justice, and making the victims seen, heard, and validated so they can move on and be healed. Because we shouldn't forget that those 1,000+ victims, they're not just a number, they're actual human beings that deserve to have closure and justice for their pain and suffering. Thank you very much. Enrique Artiaga, I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow for an episode of Precision Cycle BTS. And we'll be back on Friday with another show of Narcissism Nation. Until then, thank you very much and take care.